to launch protocol that proposed cells are complete. Direction to follow on. Phase 2 launch load complete. All fuel, all oxidizer on Falcon 9. 1 minute 34 seconds to go till launch. Gas process is started. Falcon 9 is a startup. Targeted Canada. SPS is on for launch. Under a minute now, SPS and flight termination system has been armed. Great, pretty quick. Go for launch. SpaceX Dragon, let's go for launch. Let's like this handle. T-minus 30 seconds. Stage 1 tank pressing deployed. T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Real NASA, good SpaceX, Godspeed, spot and done. So rise longitude around American space flight. The new generation is continuing to train. 20 seconds in the flight stage when propulsion is power. Flying crew on board Dragon and Falcon 9 and look at them go. Falcon power coming on. M1D throttle down. Throttling down to get ready for the period of maximum dynamic pressure. Red the throttle button.
Hi everyone, welcome to Space for All. Thank you for watching. I am your host, Steve Lang, and we are going to be, as always, studying and looking at things that are space related. Today's presentation is geared more towards sort of the younger grades, but certainly everyone's welcome to join and hopefully finds some information that they hadn't heard before. Today's topic is called Dextre, Canada's helping hand in space. And you may have guessed that we are going to be talking about Canada's most famous robot, and that is, of course, Canadarm, and then its predecessors, some of the things that came before. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the newer robots that Canada has made and is working on. So as always, we are going to start with our land acknowledgement and O Canada. So let's get going on that. We begin each day by acknowledging the land upon which we live and work. Please stand as you are able for the land acknowledgement, followed by O Canada. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.
on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
And again, thank you for joining us for Space for All, where we study and look into all things space. Today's talk is going to be about Canadian robotics, and we're going to talk about Canadarm and then a few robots you may or may not have heard about. Now, if I say to you, think of a robot, what comes to mind? Well, for me, at least, usually one of these comes to mind, one of the many robots that, of course, we see in movies, and Star Wars has quite a few of them. Now, maybe when I said think of a robot, this came to mind. Maybe you have a toy or have seen a toy robot. Now, of course, a lot of the ideas of robots come from the movies. There's lots of different examples of robots in movies. But did anyone, when I said think of a robot, think of this? Yeah, you might have one of these in your home. This, of course, is a robotic vacuum that you program it, it goes around and vacuums your house for you. Maybe you've got one of these in your house. This is a robotic cat litter cleaner. Never knew they had those. Now, of course, you may have also seen this kind of robot around. If you've been near a swimming pool, sometimes you'll have these robots, and they automatically, much like the vacuum for the house, they vacuum the bottom of the pool. That's a type of robot. And did you think that one of these are also robots? Maybe you've got an Alexa or a Google in your home. Those are versions of a robot. Now, if I said to you, think of a space robot, what would come to mind? Well, for some people, of course, a robot that looks like this, Robonaut 3. This is a NASA robot that they're working on. That they've had a Robonaut 1, a Robonaut 2 that was on the International Space Station, and now they're developing the latest Robonaut 3 to, of course, do some of the more dangerous work on the International Space Station. How about this one? Perseverance. This is a robot that, as you and I are talking right now, is actually on its way to Mars. They have a sister robot called Curiosity, which is on the planet Mars right now. It looks very, very similar. It's been driving around there for a little over 8 years. It's gone 23 kilometers. Now, Perseverance is going to be landing, so check your calendars, and you can check NASA. They'll be landing, hopefully, if everything works well, on February 18th. You can see some live coverage. They'll be talking about it, and they'll have some pretty cool animations to show us what they think the landing would look like. Of course, there's nobody there to film it, so it's all done with animations, but they'll be getting live feed, and they'll be able to tell us what's going on. But if I said to you, think of a Canadian robot, what comes to mind? I bet you this doesn't come to mind. Now, if you look at a robot as a machine, which technically that's the definition, this is a Canadian robot. In fact, it's our first Canadian space robot. It is a satellite. We are the third country to actually put or have a satellite put into space. The United States put it up there for us. We built it, of course. It was called Alouette 1, and that went up into space back in September of 1962. But I'm hoping when I said think of a Canadian robot, what came to your mind was Canada's most famous robot, and that is the Canadarm. Now, a little bit of history there. The Canadarm was built for the space shuttle. So after the Americans went to the moon, they decided that they wanted to continue exploring space, but a little closer to Earth. So they designed this rocket and this spaceship. And you can see it there on the launch pad. This is back in the 1970s. Now, the orbiter, or the funny airplane looking thing, well, that would go into space. And in the back of it, they had a really big area called the cargo bay. There you can see the cargo bay doors are open. And they would use the cargo bay area of the shuttle to take up large objects like satellites. But of course, they realized that they needed to be able to move the objects out and that they would need a robotic arm of some sort to do that. By the way, that cargo bay is big enough to hold, you know, those large orange school buses you may have traveled on? Well, one of those would easily fit in the cargo bay and still have a little bit of room left over. So the Americans, the NASA, came to Canada and said, would you guys be willing to build a robotic arm for us? And we said, sure, no problem. And there you can see the Canadarm as it came to be known. And it was so important, it actually flew on the second test flight of the space shuttle. Because, of course, a lot of their missions that they had planned were dependent on this robotic arm working. Now, the name that the NASA's people gave it was the Remote Manipulator System, or RMS. You might see that sometimes. But, of course, we gave it its own name, the Canadarm. And here's some video showing the Canadarm over 30 years of service. There it is being tested, and there it is being assembled in Brampton, Ontario. Of course, it was launched aboard the space shuttle, and there it is on that first flight where they had to see if it could actually work in space as it was designed to do. And there's the cargo bay. And this is over the years, the different objects that the Canadarm has grabbed onto. There it is in the cargo bay of the shuttle. And there it is grabbing onto a satellite and moving it around. And that's the astronauts aboard the shuttle looking through the windows and doing the controls. It's kind of like operating a video game with the joysticks, having to move it around. And there, of course, is the satellite being released from the Canadarm. And there, guess who that is? That is the first Canadian to officially operate the arm in space. That was Chris Hadfield. And there they are again, looking through some of the windows up into the cargo bay where that Canadarm is. Great shot looking down the arm. Some of the different operations that they've done over the years with the Canadarm. Here it is with the pallet of the Canadarm2. We'll get to that shortly. Often they would have astronauts, they call it flying, on the end of the arm. And this is a great way to put an astronaut in exactly the right spot that you need and then hold them there so that they can, well, a little bit hard to get the job done. So by having them on the end of the arm, you can hold them in place. There's Steve McLean, another Canadian astronaut. He was the third Canadian to go into space. They move the arm very slowly because you don't want things to get out of control. And you want to be very precise about how you're doing things. So there's a great shot of the Canadarm in the cargo bay. There's the end of the arm. There's a great shot of it lining up to grab onto something and moving it around. They have cameras on all the different parts, the elbow and the near the wrist, so they can actually see exactly what it is they are doing as they move that Canadarm around. Now, nobody had ever built a robotic arm for a space shuttle before, so how do you do that? Who do you ask? There was nobody to ask. So we had to come up with the design all of ourselves. So Canadians decided, well, let's use something we know. We know how our arm works, kind of similar. It's really good and useful for grabbing onto things. So let's design our robotic arm, the Canadarm, like that. It's connected at the base of the shuttle by your shoulder. So there's a shoulder joint that can move in a couple of different ways. And then, of course, you have the elbow, which really just goes back and forth. You have the wrist. We won't talk about the hand right now. That'll be in a few minutes. But here's the Canadarm as it's being tested in Brampton at a company that was called Spar Aerospace. They're now called McDonnell Detweiler. And here you can see it without its covering on. Really kind of interesting to see all the wires. And the shoulder is at the far end by the blue window. You can see the elbow in the middle, and then that wrist joint. And we'll talk again about the hand part later on. What's amazing is on Earth, this arm can't even lift itself off the ground. And yet in space, it can lift really huge satellites and move them around as if they were nothing. So here's a shot, again, of the Canadarm being used to grab the Hubble Space Telescope. It had to be fixed. This is a large telescope, about the size of a bus, again, that is floating around in orbit around the Earth. Unfortunately, it had some problems with some of its inside parts, so they had to fix it. They grabbed it by the arm, pulled it into the cargo bay of the shuttle, where it was docked and held in place. And then the astronauts, as you can see in the far picture there, they went on the end of the arm and they started to open up and take out and replace some of the parts. Some of those parts were the size of a piano, so pretty big. So there you can see the astronauts on the end of the arm. And the arm has been used for a number of missions. Here you can see again Chris Hadfield, first Canadian to operate the arm. And on his mission, what you're seeing there in the left-hand side, that was the Russian space station Mir, which was up there at the time. And they were bringing a docking port so that the space shuttle could easily dock with the Russian space station. And of course, you see the Canadarm, which was instrumental in docking the two pieces together. Chris Hadfield helping do that. Another shot, this is of the beginning of the International Space Station. Now, it's really big right now, but it started off as two small pieces, kind of like putting Lego together. They had to connect smaller pieces together to eventually make a really big piece. So the first two pieces were a Russian piece and an American piece. And there you can see it. The one with the wings, those are solar arrays. That was a Russian piece that was floating in space, had been delivered by a Russian rocket. And then the Canadarm grabbed the American piece, the piece you see right there in the right, and they docked it with the Russian piece. Now, I've kind of not mentioned about the hand part of the Canadarm, and that's because it doesn't look anything like your hand or mine. A hand is a very complicated mechanism to build, and although we can build robotic hands, you don't want to lose a satellite, and if the arm or the hand doesn't work properly, well, you could lose a $100 million satellite pretty easily. So Canadians came up with a really easy way, simple way to grab onto things, and that we call an end effector. So that is really the hand of the Canadarm. And really it's a tube, and inside that is a smaller tube that can rotate. And what you've got inside that is a wire. So when you rotate or spin the inside cylinder, those wires spin around and form that little cross section right there. So what they do is anything that the Canadarm is meant to grab onto, well, they put this on. This is called a grapple fixture, and this is how the arm grabs things. It's just a simple post. Now they align it with those kind of nodule looking things, but the wire that you just saw wraps around that post. There you can see the two of them coming together. Now, if you accidentally bump it and it starts to float away, which is the big problem in space, well, there's a ball at the end, and that wire wraps around and catches on the end of the ball. And then they're actually able to grab on with latches and move very large objects in space. Now, if you wanted, you can actually make a model of the end effector. I'll post these instructions and a video, hopefully this weekend. So if you're interested in doing this at home, it is actually pretty simple. All you need are a couple of cups that can nest or go together, some string, and some tape. Now, I also suggest you have a marker to help measure some things out. Now, make sure the cups, when they can actually spin one inside the other. A few plastic cups are designed so they don't spin. That doesn't work very well. So you do want them to be able to spin. But I'll post these instructions hopefully later on the weekend as well as a video. And if you want to build a grapple fixture, you can do that as well. You can build those out of, I've got two examples here. I built one out of paper plates, a pencil, and some tape. I also built one that I have with students that they're going to use. It has to be a little bit stronger, so I've made that out of metal pie plates, but it works just as well. So there's that end effector. It's going to grab onto the piece, or it's going to be used to move the astronauts around. Now that first Canadarm, well, that cost us $108 million, and we gave it to NASA. Here you go, free of charge. Now, some students, when I say that, they always say, why would we do that? It sounds kind of crazy, I guess. But the Americans, while they were very thankful, they gave us 3 shuttle missions for Canadian astronauts to fly aboard the shuttle. So the reason that we have Marc Garneau, Roberta Bondar, and Steve McLean, they were the first 3 Canadians to fly aboard the space shuttle, fly in space. Well, that's because of us giving and building the Canadarm for NASA. Now that arm flew on 90 missions. Now they did buy 4 more arms from us, so I think we got a pretty good deal out of it. And on those 90 missions, the arm worked every single time without a problem. Now today, of course, we have the International Space Station, which is floating, circling, orbiting around the Earth right now as we speak. There are actually 7 people living up there, and there are 18 different countries that are partners in building the International Space Station. So what do you think Canada's contribution was? Of course, the people who were starting to build it said everyone's got to contribute or give something. They came to Canada and they said, what do you think you want to contribute? So what do you think it was? Well, if you guessed another robotic arm, you would be correct. Now, the first one, remember, was called Canadarm. So the second one, well, we called that one Canadarm2. But this arm is a little bit different than the original arm, which, if you remember, was connected all the time at the shoulder, much like your own arm. But the Canadarm2, well, we needed to move that around the station to get to all the different places. So it's a bit longer, but we also put a different end effector, one on each end. These are more advanced than the original, but the same simple design, just a little more computerized. But there's now one on each end. So it actually can reach around, grab onto a grapple fixture, release and move from one to another, kind of like a big inchworm kind of walking end over end, or like a slinky going down the stairs. It kind of flips over itself, grabs onto another grapple fixture, and can move around the station that way. And here you can see Chris Hadfield in the left. He was the first Canadian to do a spacewalk, and he did it to help assemble Canadarm2. And the amazing part is he's actually standing on the end of the Canadarm to steady himself so that he can assemble. It was so big it wouldn't be able to go up in the shuttle as kind of one long piece. So they bent it in half. He had to bolt it together, and there you see on the left. And the picture on the right is the pallet, the container that it came up in. And you can see the original Canadarm handing off the pallet from the Canadarm2. And here's some video with Chris talking about, and the other astronauts on that mission, talking about the very first movement of the Canadarm2.
With Susan and Jim flying. This is where you operate the arm from, and this is the very first move of the space station arm, the Canadarm2, lifting the first of its huge joints up and out of the pallet that brought it up. With Jim and Susan, you fly it purely looking at the camera views inside and reaching around the side of the lab and over top of the shuttle to grab onto the side of Destiny to make it permanently part of the space station.
Well, our work outside wasn't done. We went out for another EVA on the 6th flight day, and we're getting set up to basically Canada station for the next 10 or more years. John and Bones were in that flight deck of the orbiter, keeping us on the timeline and driving the arm. And this is a neat shot of actually mating some of the power connectors that we use to power the arm. You can see that it's actually fairly challenging work. We're wearing a very thick pressurized glove. I'd liken it to trying to do brain surgery wearing a hockey mitt or a baseball glove. It's definitely very different than working in your own workshop. Some of the
So there you can see the first Canadarm2 movements as they were connecting it. And there it is, connected to the very small, still growing International Space Station. So although our contribution is relatively small by size, it's actually a very important part because, of course, well, much like Lego, when you're joining the parts together in space, well, you need a way to do that. Canadarm and Canadarm2 certainly played that important role. Here's a couple of great pictures of that Canadarm2 in space. And I love this picture of the end effector. It's now called the latching end effector, or LEE, just a more complicated version of the end effector. Great shot through the cupola window on the International Space Station. And again, a couple more shots of Canadarm bent and fully extended. Now today, the International Space Station is complete. They may move some parts around, but mostly the arm is being used, much like Canadarm, to move the astronauts around, hold them in place if they need to while they're doing maintenance. But the other big important part is, well, there's a resupply ship. Here's Cargo Dragon, as it's called. There's no people flying it. It comes up full of supplies with food and computers and equipment, and it has to be docked to the station so they can unload it and get all those supplies. So the Canadarm2 grabs the Cargo Dragon and connects it to the International Space Station. And there is where they control it from, inside the ISS. And there you can see Canadian astronaut Bob Thirsk helping with the controls. So here is some video of Canadarm2. Now I've sped it up probably about 200 times so that you can see it moving, because they move very, very slowly. So just to speed things up here, I've sped it up. But here you can see some video of Canadarm2. And there's that resupply ship, that Cargo Dragon, getting closer, and the arm grabbing onto it. There's that grapple fixture we talked about. And of course, moving it into place so that it can now dock with the International Space Station. So there is the Canadarm2, but then they realized that end of that arm is really, really big. So they needed to have something a little bit smaller to get into the smaller areas that the Canadarm2 couldn't reach. And just like you might pick up a little pair of pliers or a tool to get into somewhere small, they decided, let's build an even more dexterous, or a little arm that can get into places. So that's the one that you see on the right. And its full official name is the Special Purpose Dexterous Manipulator, which it's hard to say. So they decided to give it the nickname Dextre. And there you can see it. It is a little two-handed robot arm, and it goes on the end of the Canadarm2. And there you can see it on the end. So this way, if they need to get into areas, and some parts on the International Space Station have to be changed out or replaced, in order to get into those smaller areas, they can put the Dextre on the end of the Canadarm2 and then get those small robotic fingers, if you will, to get in there and get into the parts and replace them. And there's a great shot of Dextre on the end of Canadarm2. You see the solar array from the space station in the background. Now, a lot of times they don't need it, so Dextre just sits there ready to go. And that's a great shot of the grapple fixture right at the top there that the Lee, or the latching end effector, is going to grab onto. Just a close-up shot of that. And another shot of Dextre. So there you have the Canadian space robotics. And we started a very long time ago, actually in the 1970s, with, of course, the Canadarm first flying in the early 1980s. And then we built Canadarm2 for the International Space Station. And of course, Dextre is now up there on the International Space Station. So what do you think the future of Canadian robotics is? Well, guess what? There's plans to go back to the moon. They're going to build a lunar space station. It's called the Lunar Gateway. And if you're looking over on the left there, you'll notice something that looks a little familiar. That is, of course, a robotic arm. And in December, it was announced that Canada was given the job of creating a new robotic arm for this future mission. And of course, they've already started calling it Canadarm3. So that's the future of Canadian robotics. We'll be building, hopefully, a new arm for the missions to the moon, which should be starting to happen in the next couple of years. So that's it. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about some of our famous Canadian robots. Hope you've enjoyed our talk today. If you want to join me tomorrow's talk is going to be, again, a little bit more advanced, but we're going to be looking at the differences between some of the things you find in science fiction and what the reality is. And then I've got a number of new talks planned for February. If you check the website, you'll be able to see all of those. I'm still working out the details on what they are. If you've got some suggestions for what you might like to see in February for those talks, please, I'm happy if you want to email me and let me know. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you tomorrow or perhaps later in February. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.